So welcome along to the first of our Bible seminars in this 5-part series, COVID-19, Could We Be Living in the End Times? It's pretty topical, isn't it? Where I'm sitting at home here, locked down as all of us are, and some homemade COVID-19 graphs on the wall behind me. We're all kind of struggling to come to grips with this new reality. And tonight I thought we might share some thoughts from the scriptures about our extraordinary situation and what the Bible has to say about us living in these extraordinary times. Now, as Derek's kind of mentioned, I just want to give you a couple of things to think about. Just disclaimers as we begin. So the first one is, as Christadelphians, and myself included, we have no theological training. We don't go to theological school. We are just ardent Bible students. We love reading and studying the Bible, and that's the basis of what we want to share tonight. The second thing is we don't have a paid ministry, so we're not getting a retainer. We're not getting any funding. This is we're all purely volunteers. And lastly, we have no hidden agenda tonight, no ulterior motives, no political motives. We're not trying to convert you. We believe God can do that. We are not after your money. We don't have any kind of hidden agenda. We just want to share with you what we believe the scriptures have to say about the times in which we live, and the way in which perhaps tonight some thoughts about this remarkable virus that is sweeping the world. So our roadmap for tonight, where are we going to go together as we discuss this topic? Well, I want to just start with the current situation, COVID-19, where we are in the story, and some thoughts about what's been happening as our world's been turned upside down the last few weeks. Secondly, I want to just take a step back and look at the last 100 years in Bible prophecy and try and put what we see today in a broader context. So we're going to do that for a few minutes and just look at the amazing way in which the Bible has foretold so many things in the last 100 years that we can have absolute confidence that God knows what's happening and that he's in control. Then I'm going to just have some thoughts on the coronavirus. Now, the Bible doesn't say anything explicitly about COVID-19, that those words never occur in the scriptures, but the Bible does have to say some things about plagues and pestilence and some quite thought-provoking ideas, I think, from the scriptures that maybe we can share with you tonight as we ponder the significance of COVID-19 and the coronavirus. And lastly, we want to really just finish by saying how the scriptures can give us hope in what sometimes looks like a hopeless world. So, the current situation. Now, I looked up the numbers today and, well, the world is on its knees, isn't it, friends? There's 1.77 million people as of this afternoon who have been infected with the coronavirus. And of those, almost 109,000 have passed away in the last few weeks. And the world is grappling with this enormous situation, tragedy on every side, and spending trillions and trillions of dollars to try and keep the economies going, and we are just getting started. And one of the words that's come up a lot with this virus is this word, unprecedented. We live in unprecedented times. And really, the coronavirus is unprecedented, even for modern day viruses like SARS or Ebola or MERS or other ones that you may have heard of, about in the last few weeks. Just 2 or 3 weeks ago, the country of France cancelled its baccalaureate general exam to get into university. It's the first time that this exam in the nation of France has been cancelled in 212 years, since its inception in 1808 by Napoleon himself. This is unprecedented in the history of the world. Barring a couple of breaks for world wars, World War I and World War II, the Tokyo Olympics have just been postponed to next year, the first time they've ever been postponed for 124 years. The Boston Marathon, first time it's been cancelled in 124 years. The Oxford-Cambridge boat race, first time It's been cancelled apart from the world wars for 166 years. Something is happening, isn't it, friends? We are living in unprecedented times. And the world is kind of powerless. I mean, you think about it. One of the world's most famous and powerful men, Boris Johnson, he's put into hospital in ICU, and the doctors basically have to cross their fingers and hope for the best. I mean, no one is immune from this tiny little bug sweeping the world with devastation. So we're living in extremely difficult and challenging times, and we want to just think about how this is impacting on our lives. You may have heard of the doomsday clock. It's put out by the Association of Atomic Scientists, as you can see on the screen. And over the years, they have moved the clock further or closer to midnight as a sign of how impending the end of the world is, the end times, you might say. Well, on January 23rd of this year, 2020, the atomic scientists moved the doomsday clock from 2 minutes to 12 to 100 seconds to 12. It's the closest it's been to midnight in the 74 years of the doomsday clock. And it was put there before we had really even come across the coronavirus. So the world is on edge, isn't it, friends? The world's view of the world is that we're standing right on the brink of something, well, maybe self-destruction. And if we kind of contemplate our world in 2020, think about what characterizes our world. These are some of the things that probably come to mind. Like huge changes in the climate. We've had Australian bushfires, massive droughts, huge hurricanes and tornadoes. Worst that they've ever been in dozens and dozens of years. And the scientists are telling us it's getting worse. We've got to do something about it. There is a lot of anxiety in the world about climate change, especially in the last 12 months. And that's one of the reasons why the doomsday clock has moved closer to midnight. We've got wars, perpetual thing, but getting worse. Civil unrest. I mean, the last 10 or 15 years, with the Arab Spring and other places in South America, civil unrest has been ongoing and increasing. What about the problem of poverty and hunger? There's not enough food to feed everyone in the world, and yet the rich keep getting richer, the poor keep getting poorer. There's corruption on an unprecedented scale. Financial crises as the world becomes more and more dependent on a paperless society. You can just imagine the debt that will be incumbent upon the next generation after the coronavirus. I mean, these things are causing anxiety in the world in which we live. Terrorism, uncertainty. The scriptures have this to say. Daniel chapter 12 and verses 1 and 4. At that time, there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words, seal the book, even to the time of the end. And you might be forgiven, friends, for looking at the world in which we live and feeling some degree of fear, some degree of anxiety, some degree of uncertainty. Maybe even you're feeling lost, in despair at what might be coming upon the earth. And the coronavirus is really, if you like, heightening all those feelings. It's like we're being poked right in the eye by the coronavirus, and it's starting to feel like our very existence is threatened. All these other problems, and then the coronavirus on top, it's like, where are we going? What is happening? And everybody's starting to reflect that panic and fear in the way that they live, in the way they shop, in the way they deal with one another, domestic violence. People are on edge. Now, tonight, friends, we don't want to add to anybody's fear. We're not here to sensationalize the situation or to talk of doomsday ends of the world. We're not trying to make anyone think really that we stand on the edge of a global oblivion. In fact, far from that. We actually want to do quite the reverse, because whilst the world might be characterized by this picture, uncertainty lying ahead. And it's true that we live in very fragile times, as Daniel chapter 12 said, that there will be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time. Now is not a time for fear. Now is not a time for anxiety, because Daniel chapter 12 goes on to say that at that time, at the time of the end, thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. And so tonight we want to try and shift our focus, if we can, from anxiety, fear, uncertainty to hope and excitement, because truly we are living in the end times. But this is not a cause for despair. It's a cause actually for excitement, because we stand on the edge, friends, of something truly remarkable that's going to sweep across the earth in a far more remarkable way than the coronavirus. We stand on the edge of enormous change, not the end of the world, not some cataclysm where the world is destroyed, not the end of the world, but just the end of an age and the beginning of something absolutely amazing that we want to share with you tonight and in the series of seminars that we have over the next few weeks. This is the dawn of a new era. And as Bible students, we feel that what we've seen in the last few years really is the signs that Jesus Christ is about to return to the earth and cause some massive and amazingly good changes in the earth. So it's a time not for uncertainty, but a time for hope. Well, I want to now move into our second section tonight, which is the last 100 years in Bible prophecy. And before we do, look what it says here in Isaiah 46. These are words written maybe 2,500 years ago. I am God, and there is none else. I am God, and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. So one of the things that the Bible puts forward as the proof of its own veracity, the proof of its own truthfulness, is that God says he can predict the future. He can declare the end from the beginning, and from ancient times, the things that are not yet done. So what I want to do now is just stand back a little from the coronavirus and just think a little bit more broadly, perhaps over the last 100 years, and see the amazing way in which God has fulfilled Bible prophecy in the things that we've seen happen in the world. So now I want to just give you, if you like, a broader context to what we want to look at tonight. Now, a couple of important things just to say before we get started on this timeline of the last 100 years. We're going to briefly survey a very broad sweep of Bible prophecy, but it's important that we realize this. We're not expecting any of you that are listening to get or to remember all of these things that we're about to look at together. In fact, we don't even have time to look up the quotations, which is why I'm going to put most of them on the screen. Usually we would try and turn them up so that we can verify them ourselves, but tonight I'm going to just put them on the screen together. And we're going to expand on some of these topics as we go through the seminar series in the next few weeks, God willing. But what I do want you to do, you might not grasp everything, but just try and get these two things. Be impressed by these two things. One, that the Bible has an awful lot to say about the times in which we live. I mean, some people have said the Bible's a dead book. It's irrelevant. Well, tonight, I hope you'll see in the next few minutes, the Bible is definitely well and truly alive, and it has a lot to do and to say about our times. It's topical, it's relevant, and it's up to date. So the first thing is the Bible has a lot to say about the end times. And secondly, prophecy is being fulfilled in an increasing rate. It's speeding up. Prophecy is happening faster and faster before our very eyes. So now let me take you through the last 100 years or so and try and link some historical events with what the scriptures, we believe, have said and prophesied would happen, sometimes thousands of years ago. The first one I want to start with is 91 years ago, and this date here, 1929, which may be unknown to you, but really was a watershed moment in the last 100 years for the whole world. Did you know that in 1929, the Roman Catholic Church was absolutely broke, bankrupt? There were holes in the roof of St. Peter's. Rats were eating the sacramental bread. They didn't have enough money to pay for cleaners. But on February the 11th, 1929, the Pope signed a treaty with Mussolini. It was called the Lateran Treaty. And it gave the Pope the Vatican City as a sovereign country. It made the Vatican City exempt from taxes. The state of Italy would pay for all of the priests for all nations, and there was $90 million thrown into the pot. And for that, the Pope promised Mussolini that all Catholics would vote for him. It was a, I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine. Well, since 1929, when the Vatican was absolutely broke, you know what's happened. With some shrewd investments and the use of the Vatican City as a tax-exempt haven for Italian businesses, the Roman Catholic Church has gone from being a poor institution to probably the most wealthy institution in the world. In 91 years, it has utterly transformed itself. Now, that's exactly what the scriptures have to say, because look at these words, Revelation 17 and Revelation 18. Because the Roman Catholic Church, we believe, is portrayed in Revelation 17 as a woman. And it says she's arrayed in purple and scarlet color, decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. She's immensely wealthy. And she's got a golden cup in her hand full of abominations. And upon her forehead, this code name is written, Mystery Babylon the Great. It's a code name for the Roman Catholic Church. And in the next chapter, Revelation 18, this same system is portrayed not as a woman, but as a great city. But we know it's the same because look what it says. The great city was clothed in fine linen, in purple and scarlet, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. Exactly the same description as the woman of chapter 17. And then it goes on to say, for in 1 hour her great riches are come to naught. Do you know, those verses in Revelation 17 and 18 would not have made sense if we were reading them before 1929, because there were no gold and precious stones and pearls in the Roman Catholic system. But now, 91 years on, the Roman Catholic system is the most immensely wealthy institution in the world. And Revelation 17 and 18 have happened in the lifetime of some of us. Well, what about we move on a few years to 1948 and the giving of Israel back to the Jews as their homeland? An amazing Bible prophecy that was fulfilled. You might have seen this picture before, the Declaration of the State of Israel by David Ben-Gurion on May the 14th, 1948. Against all odds, they fought off the Arabs and were declared a new nation. Well, that's exactly what Ezekiel had said in Ezekiel 38 and verse 8. After many days thou shalt be visited. In the latter years thou shalt come into the land that is brought back from the sword. They came out of captivity from every nation, gathered out of many people against the mountains of Israel, which have always been laid waste. But it's brought forth out of the nations, and they shall dwell safely, all of them. And Ezekiel 38 talks of a time when Israel would be reinstated in their old homeland. Now, you might never have heard of Ezekiel chapter 38. You might not even have ever read it before or even know where it is in the Bible. Tonight, we just want you to be impressed by the fact that we believe that this momentous date and time was prophesied by Ezekiel 2,500 years ago. And we're going to look at Ezekiel chapter 38 in one of our seminars. In fact, a whole night looking at this momentous chapter. I think it's seminar 4 in the series. And incidentally, I think we're doing a whole nother seminar. I think it's seminar 3 on God's purpose with Israel. So just a taste tonight to give you a little bit of a feel for the fact that These things are spoken of so long ago. Well, what about this? 1957, the coalition of the European Union. The Treaty of Rome was signed in 1957. It was the start of what we know as the European Union. It began as the EEC. Now we know it as the European Union. There's political union. There's union of currency. And now they're talking very strongly about military union. Would you know that the scriptures foretold this very thing? Look at these words in Revelation 17. The 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. It's describing a group of nations, 10 kings, who are going to volunteer to give up their sovereignty for one beast, for one political system. This is a description of the European Union. Right there, in graphical form, using the analogy of a beast in Revelation 17. And what we saw happen in 1957 has flowed right through time, and we can see the development of that even today. Well, what about this amazing date, 1967? Jerusalem recaptured by the Jews, prophesied in Joel 3 and Luke 21. Behold, in those days and at that time, when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem. The captivity of Judah was fulfilled in 1948, as we just saw, with the Jews coming back to the land, but they never reclaimed Jerusalem until 1967. But Joel had said they would, because God would bring again the captivity of Jerusalem. Or Jesus Christ himself, Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And when we saw Jerusalem captured by the Jews in 1967 as Bible students, there was much excitement because we knew that this was what was going to happen. Well, what about this? In the 1960s and 70s, the flourishing of humanism as, I suppose, a new world religion, the moral decay and moral relativism that came from declaring God to be dead and declaring that there is no absolute right and wrong. Everything, those ideas flourished in the 1960s and 70s with the hippie movement. This is what Jean-Paul Sartre says about humanism and moral decay. If God did not exist, everything would be permitted. Actually, that's a quote from Fyodor Dostoevsky, who was a Russian philosopher in the 19th century. And he goes on to say that if that's true, if God doesn't exist, then, well, we can do whatever we like. Well, that's really existentialism. That's the starting point. Everything is indeed permitted if God does not exist. There's no absolute right and wrong. There's no moral compass. And man is in consequence forlorn, for he cannot find anything to depend upon, either within or without himself. He discovers forthwith that he is without excuse. So the philosophies of humanism started to ramp up throughout the world and take over in the education system, in the philosophy system of the world. Everybody was starting to see that this was the new religion. You got rid of God, but actually, you just enthroned man, and you found that there wasn't really the answers that you thought were there. Well, this is what it says in 2 Timothy 3 about the last days. See how cogent an insight this is to our time. In the last days, perilous times shall come, for men shall be lovers of their own selves, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God. And the philosophers got rid of God and ended up just worshipping themselves. They became lovers of their own selves rather than lovers of God. Prophesied in 2 Timothy 3, verses 1 to 4, as a descriptor of the last days. That's the time in which we live. It's almost as if the words of Jean-Paul Sartre were prophesied by the scriptures. Well, what about this? 1991, the fall of communism in the Russian Soviet Union and the rise of Orthodox Russia. We believe that communism was really, well, it was never really destined to be the way of Russia, because communism is really based on atheism, where there is no God. But we believe that the destiny of Russia, as marked down in the scriptures, is that it is a religious nation. In fact, it acts and attacks on the basis of religion. Look what it says here in Joel chapter 3 and verse 9. This is what the scriptures say will be the way of thinking at the time that Russia, we believe, invades the Middle East. Proclaim ye this among the Gentiles. Prepare war. Do you know that word literally means sanctify war? Make it holy. This is a religious invasion when Russia wakes up itself and comes down into the Middle East. Wake up the mighty men. Let all the men of war draw near. Let them come up. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. We believe that Russia has a very definite ambition to overrun the Middle East. And when it does, it will come down partly in the name of religion. That was not possible under the communist regime. But since 1991, when Mikhail Gorbachev threw away communism, and especially since Putin has set himself up as a new czar, and if you've been reading the newspaper recently or looking at the news, you will see that right now he's trying desperately to change the constitution so that he can be the leader of Russia for an unprecedented 36 years and make Orthodox Christianity the state religion. So everything that we saw from Daniel chapter 8 and from Joel chapter 3 is coming to pass before our very eyes. What about this? Daniel chapter 12, enormous growth of knowledge. Now, I was amazed to see this particular graph. If you haven't seen this before, this is startling. Look on the left-hand side. This is the increase in knowledge in our age, from the Industrial Revolution through the Information Age to what they're calling now the Post-Information Age on the right-hand side. Now, right on your left, it was taking 400 years for knowledge to double. As we came forward into the 1900s, it was doubling every 50 years, then every 20, then every 10. In my lifetime, it's been doubling every 8 years. Since 2017, they're saying knowledge, the combined knowledge of the world is doubling every 13 months. And they were predicting probably then, because that's where the star is, I'm assuming, that by 2020, IBM was predicting the build out of the Internet of Things, which would lead to a doubling of knowledge every 12 hours. Now, that might not be true. It might not be true yet, but you can see the trend. It is very clear. Massive increase in knowledge, doubling every 400 years to doubling every 12 hours. Do you know, Daniel has something to say about this. 2,500 years ago. But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words, seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. It's as clear as day, isn't it? A prediction from the scriptures that this graph would be the reality of the time of the end. Well, what about this? In the 2000s, the ecumenical movement of the churches, prophesied in Revelation 16. Here's a recent photograph of Pope Francis with all the leaders of all of the major world religions, and they've used their symbols to create this kind of anagram across the front. We can all coexist together. Jews, Arabs, Hindus, Catholics, Anglicans, it doesn't matter. We're here to all draw together. It's a beautiful message of oneness, but underlying what seems like a beautiful message of oneness is the fact that the Pope has clear ambitions that his particular religion and his church will be the preeminent one above all. This is what's written on the right-hand picture on the door of St. John Lateran's church, I believe. It's in Latin, but it says, the Sacred Lateran Church will be the mother church of this city and of all the world. Oh yes, friends, there might be an ecumenical movement for all religions to combine, to say we're all climbing different sides of the same mountain, but the Pope sees very clearly that the man at the top of that mountain is him. This is what Revelation chapter 16 has to say. I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs. We believe that's the 3 spirits of liberty, equality, and fraternity from the French Revolution. Frog-like spirits from France. They came out of the mouth of the false prophet. That's the Pope. He's preaching humanism. He's preaching an ecumenical movement of drawing all together, of all being friends, of ignoring boundaries, of just being one. It says this in Revelation 17, upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. And the Pope wants the Roman Catholic Church, friends, to be the mother church. It's undisputed. He has a clear ambition. Oh, he's happy for everyone else to come in underneath him, but he will be the leader. Well, that ecumenical movement has been on a sharp increase since the days of Pope John Paul II, reaching out to third world countries, trying to drag everybody in to the Roman Catholic Church. And this present Pope is very successful at doing that, especially on social media. The ecumenical movement of the churches, well, it's right there in Revelation 16 and 17. What about this? The discovery of oil in Israel and Egypt, prophesied in Ezekiel 38 and Daniel 11. Look at this little chart. Egypt's giant gas find. There's huge oil, friends, under the sea, just off the coast in the territorial waters of Israel. That's the Leviathan giant gas field and the Zoar giant gas field for Egypt. Now, up until recently, probably the last 10 years, Israel and Egypt have really notably been the 2 Middle Eastern countries that don't have oil. In fact, you may have heard of the story. Golda Meir, who was the 4th prime minister, if I remember correctly, of Israel from 1969 to 1974, jokingly said about Moses that he led the nation of Israel through the desert for 40 years to bring them to the only country in the Middle East that doesn't have oil. And she was saying that tongue-in-cheek, but with some degree of I suppose, jealousy of the other Arab nations who were flush with money from oil. Well, no longer, because Israel has discovered massive oil fields as well as Egypt off their coast. Well, look what it says in Ezekiel chapter 38. When the leader of Russia comes down, he's going to say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. I'll take a spoil and to take a prey. There's enormous wealth, financial gain to be had by going up and invading Israel. And look what it says in Daniel 11 and verse 40. At the time of the end, that's our time, the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, but he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver and over all the precious things of Egypt. Do you know, friends, 10 years ago, Egypt is one of the poorest nations of the world. I mean, they're a third world country by and large. Oh, they've got the pyramids. They've got a few ancient artifacts in museums. But now, there's treasures of gold and silver and precious things. They're sitting on a minefield of oil and natural gas. And the oil and natural gas that discovered in Egypt and in Israel is a direct fulfillment of Bible prophecy. It's happened in front of us in the last 10 years. Well, that discovery of natural oil and gas naturally is a threat to Russia, because Russia is trying to pump oil and natural gas right across Europe and make Europe totally energy dependent upon Russia. So we're expecting as Bible students to see Russia start to try and take control of the Middle East and creep further and further across Europe, as we've seen in the last few years via Ukraine. It's exactly what we'd expect. Russia in the Middle East and the Ukraine. Look at this. Russia to upgrade Syrian naval base into permanent facility. Russia has had a naval base at Tartus, which is just on the coast of Syria, for a number of years. Now they've signed a long-term lease and they're turning it into a permanent facility. This is what Daniel chapter 11 said 2,500 years ago. At the time of the end, the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships. And he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. He shall enter also into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. Russia has clear ambitions in the Middle East. And now they have a permanent facility in Syria. Most of their ports are landlocked, mostly by ice during the winter. And Daniel 11 says they're going to come down with many ships. Well, now they have a clear all year round port in Tartus, in Syria, and some other ones in the Black Sea. So what we have expected from Daniel 11 is coming to pass in front of our eyes. Just last year, here was a chilling photograph. We haven't really read Ezekiel 38, but Ezekiel 38 talks about a confederacy of a bunch of nations that are going to come down and invade the Middle East, led by Russia, described in Ezekiel 38 as Gog, the prince of Rus, or Rus, the ancient name for Russia, Germany, which is called Magog in Ezekiel 38, Togarmah, which is Turkey, and Gomer, which is France. Those are the countries, amongst others, which are listed in Ezekiel 38 as collaborating together to bring about an enormous invading force into the Middle East. And look what we saw in the paper, in the news, just last year, end of last year, a meeting with those 4 world leaders, all holding hands. Unprecedented, friends. What we believe to and expect to happen from Ezekiel 38 is happening right on our screens in front of us as we look at the news. Well, what about the US embassy's move from, or the US's bold move to move their embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem? You might have seen that in the news. President Trump was determined to do that. Well, he's done it. And Zechariah 12 said, "In that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth shall be gathered together against it." No one knows what to do with Jerusalem. Should it be an international city? It's the center for so many world religions. Well, Trump put a line in the sand and he moved the US embassy, which was in Tel Aviv, to Jerusalem. And now Jerusalem is becoming, or it always has been, but another example topically of it being a burdensome stone has happened just in the last couple of years, 2018. Well, this timeline would hardly be complete without the monumentous news of Brexit at the start of this year, a process that started in 2016, but which ended officially just a couple of months ago. The British lion roars for Boris and Brexit. And the news is almost surprised that this could happen. We knew from the scriptures that that was exactly what was going to happen, because from Ezekiel 38, Tarshish, which is a code name for Britain, would be on the opposite side of the European Union in that great conflict which we talked about from Ezekiel 38. Look what it says in verse 13. Sheba and Dedan and all the merchants of Tarshish, that's the trading power of Britain, with all the young lions, that's the lions of the Commonwealth of Britain. They will say unto thee, art thou come to take a spoil? Art thou gathered a company to take a prey, to carry away silver and gold, and to take away cattle and goods, to take a great spoil? And Britain and the Commonwealth are going to stand up in opposition to the European Union and Russia. That's what Ezekiel chapter 38 predicted. Well, that was hard to see. Hard to see if Britain is part of the European Union. So we were very much expecting, as Bible students, that Britain would come out of the European Union at the time that it did. It took a few more months, couple more years, but just this year, friends, Ezekiel chapter 38 has become possible. Now, I appreciate that's a lot of information to go through in just a few short minutes to contemplate all of these things. Don't think for a second that this is exhaustive. We haven't talked about the destruction of Damascus fulfilled in the last couple of years from Isaiah chapter 17. We haven't talked about rising anti-Semitism. We haven't talked about NATO floundering and becoming weaker and weaker. We haven't talked about the rise in the ties between the Commonwealth nations and their cooperation. But what we can see, I believe, is a trend that in the last days, the fulfillment of prophecy is ramping up. It's getting faster and faster. More and more things are coming to pass. And the coronavirus is almost like something on top of everything that we've previously seen. Look what it says in 2 Thessalonians 5, verses 2-3. For ye yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night. For when they shall say, peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, as travail upon a woman with child. And the word travail means birth pangs. We all know what happens when a woman is pregnant and expecting a child. They start coming on, the contractions, and they grow in frequency and in force until the baby is born into the world. It is inevitable. And what this verse is saying is that the end times, the times just before the day of the Lord coming, there's going to be travail, birth pangs in the earth to bring forth into the earth the birth of a new era. So we should have a degree of excitement, friends, that we stand on the cusp of something great, something amazing, something incredible about to happen in the earth. But also, this gives us a degree of urgency, because all of the references that we've looked at tonight, very briefly, I admit, and perhaps insubstantially to your satisfaction, I admit, but all of the verses that we've looked at, these end time prophecies, all have the next major event being the revelation of God in the earth. Ezekiel 38, you will know that I am the Lord. Daniel chapter 12, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people shall stand up and deliver his people. Joel chapter 3, you shall know that I am the Lord your God, dwelling in Zion, my holy mountain. Zechariah 14, the Lord shall be king over all the earth. Revelation 17, the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. We've seen prophecy vindicated time and time again, friends. And the very next thing in all of those chapters, which all talk about the end times, is God revealing his solution. A new world order is coming. We need to get ready and we need to get excited, friends, because great things are about to happen. Well, how does the coronavirus fit into this kind of geopolitical framework of what God is doing? Well, I wanted to share some thoughts about the coronavirus. Now, you'll appreciate, as we said before, that the coronavirus is not mentioned explicitly in the scriptures. And as Bible students, we don't profess to know everything. Sometimes we only see the broad outlines of what is happening. It's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle coming together, and we have to fit the pieces of the puzzle together. So I just want to share some thoughts with you tonight, maybe about the significance of COVID-19 amongst this gathering evidence that we are at the time of the end, because so many prophecies are coming to pass. Is the coronavirus predicted in the Bible? Is it even significant? Well, look at this verse, interesting verse, I think, from Habakkuk in chapter 3. It's a description, actually, of Jesus Christ coming and arriving on the international scene. That's what we believe, and this is what it says. Habakkuk 3, verse 5. The mighty one came from Teman, which is south of Israel, the Holy One from Mount Paran. His glory covered the heavens, and the earth was full of his praise, and his brightness was as the light. He's going to come, and when you see him come, it will be unmistakable. That's what it's saying. And then it says in verse 5, before him went the pestilence, and burning coals went forth at his feet. And the margin has burning diseases. So we've got the picture of Jesus Christ coming, and ahead of him goes pestilence. Behind him, following up, comes burning diseases. Maybe, certainly it seems from Habakkuk chapter 3, and maybe we're just trying to fit the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together, that pestilence will be associated with the return of Jesus Christ. It's pretty exciting to think that that might be the case, and maybe the coronavirus is just a little piece in the puzzle. The world's on its knees. God's certainly doing something. We don't know quite what he's doing, but he's definitely doing something. What we do know is that plagues or pestilence are in God's arsenal. I mean, he controls nature and the weather, earthquakes and lightning and hail, and pestilence is one of those things. Now, here's a couple of end-time prophecies, which I'm going to read for you, but just see how the plague is associated with the end time. It's what God will use to bring about his purpose. And this shall be the plague, Zechariah 14, wherewith the Lord will smite all the people that have fought against Jerusalem. And then there comes a horrible description of what it will be like, this plague. Their flesh shall consume away while they stand upon their feet. Their eyes shall consume away in their holes, and their tongue shall consume away in their mouth. Terrible to think that a virus or a plague or a pestilence could be that fast and that devastating. Or what about this in Ezekiel 38? I will call for a sword against him throughout all my mountains, saith the Lord God. And I will plead against him with pestilence and with blood. I will rain upon him and upon his bands and upon the many people that are with him, an overflowing rain and great hailstones, fire and brimstone. Plagues or pestilence is part of what God is going to bring about as part of the judgments on the end time. But don't be in despair, because in those very verses, he goes on to say, at that time, the Lord shall be king over all the earth. Or Ezekiel 38 says, I will be known in the eyes of many nations. So the plague and the pestilence used by God are really the sign that he is about to bring about a worldwide solution. Everybody will know that he is God, and God is preparing the world for great and mighty things. What we do know is that plagues seem to be for repentance. It's to encourage people to repent. Look at these words from Revelation 9, talking about the western side of Catholic Europe. And the rest of the men which were not killed by those plagues, yet repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship devils and idols of gold and silver and brass and stone and of wood, which neither can see nor hear nor walk. Neither repented they of their murders, nor of their sorceries, of their fornication, nor of their thefts. It's describing a people who are idolatrous and completely immoral. And plagues came upon them that they might repent, and they repented not. Or what about this in Revelation 16, describing the Holy Roman Empire in the early 1800s? And men were scorched with great heat and blasphemed the name of God, which hath power over these plagues, and they repented not to give him glory. And the fifth angel poured out his vial upon the seat of the beast, and his kingdom was full of darkness, and they gnawed their tongues for pain and blasphemed the God of heaven because of their pains and sores, but they repented not of their deeds. Plagues, pestilence is sent by God sometimes as a judgment and a means by which we can examine our lives. It's a call for repentance. It's a call for us to reflect on where we are. And repentance really means change. It implies urgency. God's wanting us to pay attention. A plague is designed to make us sit up and think, what is happening in this world? What is life about? What is important? Well, that brings us to this idea that maybe the coronavirus has a parable attached to it. Now, I don't know if you've seen this little dinky chart put out just 2 or 3 weeks ago in New Zealand, describing the symptoms of COVID-19, flu, and cold. And you can see that the one distinguishing thing that differentiates the coronavirus from the flu and the cold is this: breathlessness. Now, here's an example, like a diagrammatical kind of scan of somebody's lungs. And you can see that what happens is that actually it becomes very difficult to breathe as the virus clogs up the lungs. And maybe, just maybe, there is a little parable in this for our lives. What's happening literally might have some spiritual significance, I think. This is what Dr. Raphael Vicidi, who is an infectious disease specialist at Johns Hopkins Medicine, had to say about the coronavirus and how it works. The alveoli are where oxygen and carbon dioxide are exchanged. When pneumonia occurs, which is usually how people die after being exposed to COVID-19, the thin layer of alveolar cells is damaged by the virus. That results in the linings becoming thicker than normal, he said. As they thicken more and more, they essentially choke off the little air pocket, which is what you need to get the oxygen to your blood. Now, I couldn't help think, and probably you might as well, of this parable of Jesus Christ. These are they which are sown, the parable of the sower. Those are sown among thorns. They hear the word, but the cares of this world and the deceitfulness of riches and the lusts of other things entering in choke the word, and it becometh unfruitful. It's almost like what's happening with the coronavirus literally is a spiritual description of what can happen to our lives. We can be choked by the cares of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, and other things entering in. And what God seems to be doing is stopping the world, putting the world on hold, making us think there's no live sport, there's no live concerts, there's no new movies. God is taking away the distractions from our lives, and he's making us think, are we bringing forth fruit, or are our lives actually choked by the cares of this life and the deceitfulness of riches? Maybe there's a spiritual lesson in what is actually happening with the coronavirus. Which brings us to this very interesting quotation from the prayer of Solomon. As he was dedicating the temple, he stood up in front of all the people and he said this: if there be in the land famine, if there be pestilence, blasting, mildew, locust, or if there be caterpillar, or if their enemy besiege them in the land of their cities, whatsoever plague, whatsoever sickness there be, what prayer and supplication soever be made by any man or by all thy people Israel. And then he says, which shall know every man the plague of his own heart, and shall spread forth his hands towards this house, then hear thou in heaven thy dwelling place and forgive. Solomon says there might be pestilence, plagues raging outside, but the real challenge is a pestilential disease inside, the plague of our heart, human nature. And do you know, friends, all of us are infected with this plague of our own heart. It's an amazing thought, isn't it? The plague of our own heart. And yet God has a solution for this as well, for this virus of our heart as well. This is the parable of what God did in bringing the nation of Israel out of Egypt. You might have heard of the story of the Exodus. The nation of Israel were in slavery in Egypt, and God brought them out and into the land of Israel about 3,000 years ago. And he did it by getting them to paint the blood of a sacrificed lamb around their doorposts of their houses. And when an angel of death passed over, he passed over the Israelites, and they were not subject to the plague of death. They were brought out through the Red Sea and into the promised land. It's a parable, we believe, of our own lives. And there's some striking similarities to today. First of all the families in the nation of Israel were in lockdown with their families, in isolation for the Passover. There were plagues of death on animals and on humans. The economy was crippled. All the plagues that came were designed to show the powerlessness of all the Egyptian idols. There were plagues upon the river, plagues upon the agriculture, plagues upon the gods of fertility. The whole worship system of Egypt was decimated by these 10 plagues. And maybe in this eerie similarity to ourselves today, the gods of today, sports and entertainment, food, all the restaurants are closed, there's no concerts, you can't go to work, everything we worship is stopped. And God's asking us to wait for deliverance, the deliverance that would come by association with blood. Wow, maybe the scriptures have more to say by way of parable about the coronavirus, even though it's not explicitly mentioned. Maybe God's giving us ample opportunity in the end times, friends, to sit back and reflect on our lives, to take the time to think, are we ready for the start of a new age? Well, how do the scriptures give us hope? How do they give us hope? Ephesians chapter 2 says, we once had a time when we were without Christ. In fact, we had no hope. We were without God in the world, but now in Christ Jesus, ye who sometimes were far off are made nigh by the blood of Christ. That's the blood around the doorposts of their houses. We are saved by him. Jesus Christ is offering us hope. In a world of uncertainty, in a world where we don't know what's going on, and friends, no one is going to criticize anybody right now if we're feeling lost, or we're feeling anxious about our jobs, or anxious about our health, or our financial situation. Those are very real feelings. Tonight is not to build up fear. Tonight is about hope, that there is something in the scriptures. God has the answer to all of those things and more. And those things are just around the corner. Look what it says in Psalm 91. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High will abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, he is my refuge and my fortress. My God, in him will I trust. Surely he shall deliver thee from the snare of the fowler and from the noisome pestilence. We're delivered from the pestilence, friends. We have protection because we've made God our refuge and the Most High our habitation. Now, that does not mean that we are exempt from trouble. It doesn't mean that none of us will get the coronavirus. It just means that we don't have to fear. We don't have to dwell in a place of uncertainty and despair. We can make God our refuge. We can abide in the shadow of the Almighty, because God has promised a solution to these things. In the days of Jesus Christ, he was able to cure anything. And look what it says in Matthew chapter 8. Fever is a characteristic of the coronavirus. And it says this in Matthew 8. When Jesus was come into Peter's house, he saw his mother-in-law laid sick of a fever. And he touched her hand, and the fever left her. And she arose and ministered unto them. When the even was come, they brought unto him many that were possessed with devils, demons, people who were sick. And he cast out the spirits with his word and healed all that were sick, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying, himself took our infirmities and bare our sicknesses. 2,000 years ago, friends, a Galilean carpenter walked amongst the streets of Judea, and with a single touch, he healed people who had been born blind or lame, people who were dying, people who were dead were raised from the dead. Wow, we could do with a Galilean carpenter walking around the ICU wards of the world right now, couldn't we? Every time, he wouldn't need gloves and a mask, because every patient he just touched would instantly be healed. The world desperately needs this man. And the good and great news, friends, is he's coming. He's coming back to the earth, because all of those signs, those birth pangs that we saw on our timeline tonight, all of those things, complicated things from the scriptures being fulfilled in international politics, are all signs that Jesus Christ is coming. So when we talk about the end times and we ask ourselves this question, are we living in the end times? If your view of the end times is like this, that it's a cataclysm, an absolute disaster, like an apocalypse, it's worldwide oblivion, well, that's not the end times of the scriptures. In fact, it doesn't say much of God's power. If God does actually exist and he made the world, that he would let it end up like this: complete annihilation, complete failure of everything that he set out to do. If this is the end times, then all of us are destined for despair. But the end times of the scriptures are far, far different from this cataclysm. We believe that the scriptures portray the end times as a time when our Lord Jesus Christ will come and renew the earth, a time when there'll be true justice. Man, do we need that. A time when there'll be peace, a time when the problem of world poverty will be solved. Jesus Christ is going to come and usher in an exciting new era on the stage of the world. He's going to solve pollution. He's going to solve global warming. He's going to clear up, restore the environment. He's even going to clear up the plague of our hearts forever. That's the exciting thing about the end times in which we live. Jesus Christ is coming. So rather, friends, than looking at a troubled world and being overcome by anxiety, by fear of the unknown, maybe uncertainty, which is totally understandable in today's climate, let's look at this same troubled and broken world, but with a different perspective. Let's see in its fragile brokenness the herald of a new world age, a new world order about to come. It's a new world order, friends, that we desperately need, and it's coming. Could we be living in the end times? Absolutely yes. The scriptures have been fulfilled in our very lifetime. We couldn't be more excited to share these things with you. We're on the cusp of great things. Let's, in the words of Jesus Christ himself, lift up our heads and know that our redemption draws nigh.